before we get started, I actually just wanted you to take a second and check in with yourself about, so what comes to mind for you when you think about self-compassion? So we're all kind of, influenced a little bit by the messages we get from society or maybe the family that we grew up in. Sometimes that's helpful to ask too, like what were my family that I grew up in? What were their thoughts about self-compassion? What would my friends say about self-compassion? And then also just thinking about, like, are there any fears that come up for you when you think about maybe kind of trying to increase your own level of self-compassion? For all of us, there's probably something that comes up there. And the great thing is that, so self-compassion, becoming more self-compassionate really is a journey. It's a journey of getting to know yourself more and improving your relationship with yourself and really increasing your own compassion towards others as well. That's what we know, is that when we increase our compassion towards ourselves, we increase our capacity to have more compassion for others as well. But like any journey that we're going to go on, there's going to be a lot of unknowns, but we can prepare ourselves for a little bit of what we might encounter. And that's why just being aware of some of those obstacles that you might encounter, some of your own misgivings or fears about practicing self-compassion, it can be helpful because awareness is the first step for trying to break down some of those internal barriers that we might have to practicing self-compassion. So one of the barriers that gets in the way for a lot of people is the fear that self-compassion is the same as self-pity. And this is one, it's a really common one. And a lot of time, I think this comes up because a lot of us, when we think of who do we know, who are examples of people we've seen in our lives or in the media, or of people who turn towards themselves when they're feeling pain. And a lot of time, what comes to mind for us are people who feel sorry for themselves. And we might even recognize that behavior in ourselves. I mean, we all have moments of self-pity and times where we feel sorry for ourselves, or we say like, woe is me. And so that's something that, I see someone's tuning in, hi. And so that's something that is really important to understand. What is it? So what is self-pity and what is self-compassion? So what I wanted to do to illustrate it was talk about a common problem that I see my clients running into. So again, I work with global nomads. And so a common concern that comes up is, you move to a new country and things are not going the way that you expected. So it might be a lot more challenging. You might realize that you're much more stressed than you were imagining, or that maybe, leaving your job behind and starting a new job or not working can be incredibly demotivating and can, bring up lots of different anxieties. And then there's the logistical stuff, right? Like maybe your stuff doesn't arrive when you expect it to, or you're having trouble with navigating the local culture, difficulties with different languages. And so what can happen is, so that could be a place where somebody might fall into a place of self-pity. And so self-pity really is getting into this place of ruminating. So like, what's wrong with me? These are like some of the things we might say to ourselves when we're in that place of self-pity. What's wrong with me? Why does this happen to me? This wouldn't happen to other people. This is all my fault. This isn't fair. Everyone else has it easier when they go abroad. So those, again, are kind of like maybe some of those common things that would come up with self-pity. So, and when we feel self-pity, what we're doing really is we're obsessing about, what our own problems are. We're really getting into like the middle of this storm, or what I like to think about kind of like, you're swimming and you're getting sucked under. You're getting sucked under by this place of ruminating about what's going on. And often in those moments, really what happens is we tend to forget the fact that other people, that life is hard, right? And that, when we're going through a hard moment, it doesn't necessarily mean, that we did something wrong, and it doesn't mean, life is hard. It's hard being human. It's really hard to go abroad. And, there are people, when you're going through a difficult moment, there are other people who are also going through very difficult moments too. And often they're very similar ones too. We just might not have immediate access to those people. So we tend to, when we're in moments of self-pity, we tend to be really disconnected from others. We tend to see ourselves as the only ones who are suffering in that moment. We tend to get wrapped up in a sort of like emotional drama, or where we're, we're only thinking, really focused on what's happening to us. And we tend to catastrophize things. So catastrophizing, is like imagining the worst case scenario, or really seeing like what we're going through in the specific moment as something much bigger than it actually is. So, and then what also happens is that because of that, it's really hard when we're in moments of self-pity to step back and gain perspective about what's happening to us. And that perspective is so necessary for us to be able to take action, right? And to say like, what can I do in this moment? Instead, we tend to, just get really sucked under by that self-pity. We might make choices as in response to those, how that makes us feel, that then doesn't make us feel. We might end up getting really paralyzed. What can happen is, then some people, we might avoid things by sleeping, or, engaging in emotional eating, or in consuming alcohol, or, just these unhealthy behaviors as a response to, how bad that self-pity and that catastrophizing makes us feel. So whereas self-pity, so I've talked a lot about self-pity now, self-pity is saying poor me, it's kind of seeing us as a victim. Self-compassion recognizes that life is hard for everyone. It really puts things into perspective. So it really allows us to feel less isolated when we're going through a hard time. It allows us to create a mental space to zoom out. That's a metaphor I really like as well. Zoom out, see the big picture, see the fact that, this is just today, or this is just this week, or this is just this period in my life. And it also reminds ourselves that, other people are struggling as well. And that allows us sometimes to see those struggles as more manageable. Now, I want to say something really important here. So sometimes when I talk about this common humanity piece with people, the common humanity is seeing like ourselves as like a piece in like the bigger global puzzle, right? This is what's happening to us right now. But, other life is hard. Again, it's hard to be human. And so seeing like our piece of that puzzle, sometimes what happens is that people start to feel invalidated. Like, oh, so mine is not that big. Like my suffering is not that big of a deal. And that's not what it is at all. It's not that at all. This is about validating yourself. And validating means, turning towards your pain. So what we want to do with self-compassion, we don't want to sweep it under the rug. We don't want to invalidate that pain that you're feeling. But we also don't want to get too wrapped up in the pain you're feeling either. We don't want to get over-identified with it, which is what kind of, we tend to go into those extremes, either, completely ignoring it or over-identifying with it. And later I'm going to introduce you to a self-compassion practice, which is going to help you to understand that a little bit more. So be sure to stay tuned till the end of this. And so also, so if we think back to that situation I was telling you about, that, that moment of difficulty, being in a new country, and trying to just adjust to that, and really running into a lot of different obstacles. I already mentioned what would be kind of a self-pity, self-talk, but self-compassion would say things like, this is so hard. I'm here for you. You're not alone. Or these challenges can be so painful. I'm so sorry you have to go through this. I love you, and we're going to be okay. Or sometimes we need something short and sweet, which could be like, this sucks. What do you need right now? What do I need right now? So what we know is that research shows that self-compassionate people who are higher in self-compassion, don't tend to ruminate on things. So ruminating being, just thinking and thinking and thinking about things over and over again. They don't tend to ruminate on things. And we know that rumination tends to lead to problems with anxiety and depression. So the more we can be compassionate and we can move away from that tendency to ruminate on things, that's also going to help our mental health as well, which is really important. And if anybody's interested in a study about that kind of shows that connection a little bit more, I'd be happy to provide you with that information. So last week I did suggest that you go and take Dr. Kristen Neff. Dr. Kristen Neff is an expert in the field of self-compassion. I suggested you head over to her website and take her self-compassion questionnaire. So because again, I think it's nice to know, if I'm starting this journey of self-compassion, what am I working with? Where am I at right now? And again, that's another great thing about that questionnaire too, is it's one that's commonly used in research. So if I quote anything about like research shows this, you'll kind of know, okay, it's because they're using that questionnaire and that's what they're measuring. So again, what I just want to emphasize is self-pity is a victim mentality. Self-pity tends to bring us down. And that's the last thing we want when we're already going through a moment of pain, right? What we really need is self-compassion, because self-compassion, again, it's still turning towards our pain, but it does so in a way that lifts us up and really empowers us to be able to move forward and take the next step. And so in order to do that, well, maybe you're asking now, okay, so how can I practice self-compassion? So I wanted to introduce you to an exercise that I have talked about on here on Facebook before. It's called the self-compassion break. I like this exercise because it's something you can do anywhere you are, any time of day. You can make it longer or shorter, however you want to structure it. But I also like it because it introduces the 3 components of self-compassion. So I think it's also a great way to just, again, clarify what is self-compassion. So those 3 components are mindfulness. So I already kind of touched on that. So we want mindfulness rather than, we don't want to be avoiding our feelings. We don't want to be over-identifying with our feelings. We want to be mindful of them. And so, and mindfulness allows us to have just a little bit of space between what we are feeling, but we're still observing them and we're still turning towards them. And then the other piece is common humanity, which I've also talked about today. And common humanity helps to protect us from feeling isolated and alone in those moments when we are feeling pain. And then the last piece is self-kindness, which is often what people think about when they hear about self-compassion. Self-kindness, it helps us move away from self-judgment. So it's a way to talk to ourselves and treat ourselves in the same way that we would treat a friend who's going through something difficult. And we usually tend to treat our friends or people we care about much better than we tend to treat ourselves. So self-compassion is, again, also a path to show ourselves some of that self-kindness. Another thing that we can do with this self-compassion break is to incorporate some physical touch. So there's also research showing that this is really helpful. That's physical touch. It helps to really soothe our brain, soothe our fight or flight system in those moments. Because when we are feeling emotional pain, when we're feeling stress, when we're feeling sadness, our brain can kind of, the alarm system in our brain goes off. We get into that fight or flight mode. And physical touch can help remind us, like, we're safe, we're okay. So there are so many options you have here. You can do something like giving yourself a self-hug. I really like resting one of my hands or both on my chest. If you're out in public, you can do something more subtle, like putting a hand on your leg, wrapping a hand around your stomach. Some people like to show a little more strength with their self-compassion. So they'll do something like put a hand in a fist, cover that, and put that over their chest. So again, lots of options here. And you don't have to do this, but it is a helpful component. So what we're going to do for today, again, you can do this wherever you are. You can do it with your eyes open, but if you're able to right now, you can just close your eyes or kind of like look down, and we're going to bring to mind something for us that's been difficult recently. So I want you to think of something, if you're thinking on a scale of 0 to 10. So like 0 is not difficult at all. 10 is like the most difficult thing in the world. So we want to think of something that's about a level 3, especially if you're new to this practice. We don't want to overwhelm ourselves right now. So, maybe something, if you're living abroad, something that's been challenging, or maybe something that's been difficult at work, maybe a recent mistake that you made. And we want to bring mindfulness to that. So sometimes we can identify what the feeling is. We can say, oh, that's anxiety, or that's embarrassment, that's sadness, that's anger. And again, remember, we don't want to get wrapped up in that feeling. We don't want to over-identify with it. We don't want to catastrophize it. We also don't want to push it under the rug. We just want to observe it. And one thing I like to think about with mindfulness is, maybe thinking about it like a cloud in the sky. So, okay, there's anger. It's going by. I don't have to grab it out of the sky and bring it down and overanalyze it. I don't have to push it away too fast. We're just going to acknowledge it. Okay, that's hard. Sometimes we can't label it. We just say, that's hard. And then we want to bring in that common humanity piece, reminding ourselves, like, life is hard. It's difficult to be human. Other people are going through similar things. I'm not alone. And then we want to bring in that self-kindness piece. So self-kindness, sometimes words just come to us, a way to speak kindly to ourselves. But we can also think about, what would I really need a friend to tell me right now? Maybe they would say, like, I'm here for you. This is so hard, but I'm by your side. I'm so sorry this is happening. What do you need right now? And if words don't come to you, sometimes we can also think about what would we say to a friend who is going through something similar. And then, of course, we want to turn that around and say that specific thing to ourselves. So that's the self-compassion break. And you can, again, I would encourage you to try it out throughout your day, throughout your week. I really like that exercise a lot. You can do it as more of a meditative practice, and you can also do it in line at the grocery store or at the immigration office or when you're getting ready to board an airplane. There's so many instances where it's just a great thing to go to and just, push the pause button and just be there for yourself. So I hope that I clarified for you the difference between self-compassion and self-pity. And, maybe you're just a little more convinced that self-compassion is something that you want to explore.